You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, once again, to another journey in the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my gravely hesitant co-host,
Verna Wilson. Hi, everybody.
Actually, Verna, you found this topic for this week's episode, did you not?
Yes, I did, and that's because I have relatives in Mexico. And I have relatives in Guadalajara. Yeah.
No, shut up.
Yeah, seriously. And they're the ones who found, they found another story that we did not too long ago. And I was told about this one. And I was wondering. Yeah, they told me about that one. And then I was told about this one. And I thought, gosh, my mother was raised in Guadalajara, Mexico, and she never mentioned this to me. But then she wasn't into graveyards, so of course she wasn't going to. So
yeah, I guess if she doesn't really hang out and go, oh, it's closed, I can't get in unless I go on the tour. Verna, there used to be a cemetery, I couldn't get in because I didn't want to go on the tour.
She probably knew about it, but since she didn't really care about graveyards, she wouldn't have mentioned it to me. But however, she did used to mention about a lot of old buildings and about ghosts and neighborhood ghosts where she grew up. So
now this
that's for
cemetery,
another time.
What I could make out of this story is this cemetery housed. I mean, there was pirates in there. There was ghost stories in the cemetery, vampires. So we're going to cover a whole gambit of things in this one cemetery. That's kind of the focal point.
Right. In other words, it's a very old haunted cemetery, and there's a lot of stories about it. So
exactly.
Anyway,
start off Nachito.
Yeah. So it's back in 1700, and there was a powerful pandemic that struck Guadalajara, Mexico, just like today. And the Panteón de Santa Paula was built on a back plot of the then civil hospital to bury humble people who did not have the resources to pay for a decent burial. And this was a common grave until 1848. So that year, the Bishop Diego de Arana Carpintero, he requested the construction of a cemetery in the same place. And the work was in charge of the architect Manuel Gomez Ibarra. And for 50 years, outstanding figures of the Mexican elite were buried there. So soon that cemetery began to be called the Panteón de Belén. And in the middle of the 20th century, it was restored and it became a museum for its patrimonial value. So today, it's a tradition to visit the Panteón, and many tourists come there to know its story through guided tours. They have tours there. And on the Day of the Dead, many people come to know this place, to admire its architecture, and to know the legends that survive there. So one of the tombs that receives more visitors than ever in that place is Nachito. This was the name of Ignacio Torres Altamirano, a child who died in 1882. Nachito, he suffered from a disease that prevented him from exposing himself to sunlight. And contradictorily, he suffered greatly because he feared the darkness. So legend has it that after being buried several times, several times the cemetery watcher found the coffin right outside the grave. And on the first occasion, he believed that he had been desecrated and he buried it again. But in a few days, the same thing happened. So knowing the situation, the parents of the child that were aware of the terror that their son had to darkness decided to build a mausoleum in which the coffin was exposed, and it was escorted by 4 torches that illuminated it at night. So as if this story was not enough, some say that several times they have seen the ghost of Nachito walking through the cemetery. And that's why visitors are recommended to leave toys next to the grave to contain his mischief. So another attraction of the cemetery is that of the tree of the vampire that grew right in the tomb of the Count of Baldon. This man was very unsociable, and because he only left his house at night, he was charged with several deaths. They say that several animal and human corpses were found all bled. And the settlers began to doubt the Count, who was always silent, pale, and very elegant. And then they decided to kill him. They prepared a stake with a branch of a tree, and they fulfilled the ritual of murdering him as if he were a vampire. But the story wouldn't end there, because from his grave grew a leafy tree that mysteriously bleeds every time they try to cut it. So it was so that they began to fear that the vampire would wake up if the tree fell, and that's why they decided to build a parameter grid that protects it. So they build something around the tree. So in addition, in the Pantheon, the visitors can know the story of Victoriana Hurtado. She was a woman who was born in 1833, and she suffered from a catalepsy ever since she was a child. So according to the legend, she was buried alive by her own children, Octaviano, Alejandro, and Javier, who took advantage of the fact that her mother's illness at times made her suffer in a state of stiffness, unconsciousness, and diminishing pulse. So, however, they couldn't fulfill their purpose to distribute the fortune of Victoriana because she left every penny for charity. So the real story was known because the watchman of the cemetery heard a terrible cry from the tomb of the woman the very day of her burial, and when he arrived, he saw the bloodied hand of Victoriana, who tried to leave the tomb. Later, it was learned that she died of a heart attack, and the hand was petrified. God, what rotten kids.
Yeah, great. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice to know what happens to you when you die and your kids, thanks for looking out for me after I'm gone.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, that's...
Jeez.
I'm just thinking about Nachito and his coffin that kept being above ground after it's been buried after a few days. That's kind of weird. And I wonder if isn't just someone still just digging up his coffin, because of the weird... I don't know why... It wouldn't really... I'm still trying to figure that one out, because it wouldn't really be a paranormal story until the coffin reappeared above ground the first time. And if
a couple times.
Yeah, so it would take a few times before the story would kick in and it would spread, and maybe someone would do something stupid later, like let's dig it up and put it up on the ground again. But it would take a while, so it's just weird that would happen at all. You know what I mean? Especially
since there's watch people all around, caring, grave diggers, gardeners, people caring for the cemetery. When would they be able to get away with that? I mean, that's a lot to dig.
That's just weird to me. Like, why would that happen not once but twice, a few days after the first time, and they reburied it? Mm-hmm. So I don't even have an explanation for it.
I don't either. And there's a picture of his tombstone, and there's toys all around it just to appease the child.
Mm-hmm. That makes
so if you visit, you have to put a toy there.
Yep, see that? Well, it entertains him and keeps him out of harm, I guess. It keeps him from harming. Not that he probably would, but, keeps him preoccupied.
I guess.
No, I agree. Another tale, since there's stories of vampires and pirates, this is a story of a pirate. So, according to another popular tale, a swashbuckling man once sailed the Pacific during his youth and attacked many ships laden with the riches from the Orient. As a middle-aged man, the pirate decided to settle and make a real life for himself in Guadalajara. He only had one son who did not know of his father's former life as a pirate. It seems the man had stashed somewhere in the Guadalajara area a massive treasure comprised mostly of gold and precious stones, and a few months after hiding it, the man died and was buried in the Santa Paula cemetery. Now, according to the legend, if a devout person visits the pirate's grave at midnight and prays the rosary for the man's tormented soul, the ghost of the pirate will reveal the exact location of the treasure. Now, as people have been trying for years, it is said that the ghost has not yet found the right devout person. So that's interesting. That it reminds me of a lot of movies and stuff that use that legend, but I guess this must be where the source of some of those things you see in movies and TV shows come from. Like, if you go to the grave at midnight and you say this incantation, they'll tell you the location of the treasure. This is the kind of stuff Scooby-Doo is born from.
Scooby-Doo!
Exactly. Jinkies, let's go into the cemetery and do an incantation at the pirate's grave. He'll tell us the location of the treasure. Oh, I would have got away with it too, said the cemetery keeper, if it hadn't been for you kids. Very much Scooby-Doo.
I think he just doesn't want to tell, is what I think.
It could be. It could be. I mean, maybe they made up the story that, well, he'll give it to someone who's devout and says the rosary. That sounds like the church telling people that. Where the pirate's like, no one's getting my gold. It's coming with me and it's staying with me.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's another Santa Paula legend that speaks about a child that's connected to the former hospital next door. He's a young boy. His name is Santiago. He was suffering from a terminal stomach ailment, and in some stories, it's an aggressive type of cancer. During one of her visits, Santiago's mother brought the boy one of his favorite saint statues from home to help give her son comfort through his illness. While he was sleeping, the mother placed a small statue in the boy's hands, and when he awoke, he threw the statue up against the wall, cursing God for giving him such a terrible disease. He yelled to anyone who would hear his wish that God himself would contract the horrible illness that he was suffering from. So Santiago ended his rant by saying something like, "If God gets this disease, let's see who will cure him." That night, the boy's pain was more intense than ever, and he wandered outside the hospital and into the cemetery. The next morning, the boy's body was found hanging from a tree, with the hospital bed sheets used as a noose. Sometimes at night, people claim to see the boy hanging from a tree inside the Santa Paula cemetery. This story is often told to children so that they will not lose their faith in God.
That would be very offensive to a lot of people to hear a kid say that. And I could see some believe in that culture. Oh my God, he's possessed by the devil. Because they would think you are possessed. There's only other explanation for you to defile God in such a way is if you were possessed by a demon or the devil himself to make you say those things. And in this case, I could see them using that story for kids. Don't lose faith in God or you're going to end up swinging from a tree in the cemetery.
Exactly. But you know what? The kid was in a lot of pain. When you're in a lot of pain, you don't think rationally. So I think they should have given the kid a break.
How old was the kid? Does this say?
It doesn't say, but back then, for something like that, there weren't a lot of treatments, so I can imagine the pain he was in.
I'm just thinking, how did the kid get his bed sheets and up around and tied around a tree to hang himself? I guess you could climb the tree, tie it around the tree.
I've heard of people doing that before, unfortunately. Yeah. So if the kid...
That must have been awful. Wonder what the kid had. It must have
been horrible.
I know. It makes me wonder. I'm like, poor kid. What a horrible way to go,
I know. Too. And can you imagine your parent finding you that way? Oh, how awful.
Well, hopefully he can hang out with Nachito and they can play at night.
Well, you never know.
Exactly. I have a story about a vampire in the same cemetery.
Okay.
One of the most interesting stories that's connected to this cemetery has to do with a vampire. It seems that who haunt the Highgate Cemetery in London isn't the only one. Now, we've done a show before, where we've talked about the Highgate Cemetery and
We
vampires.
talked about him once, yes.
In the mid-1800s, so the story goes, scores of small animals were found throughout Guadalajara dead and without all their blood. Now, after months of this eerie event, the same phenomena started to happen to human infants. The alarmed citizenry then formed a vigilante group to hunt down the supposed vampire who is responsible for this. Now, the mob rounded up a few suspects and singled out the palest and most vampire-looking man of the group. As is customary, according to the legendary rules of the vampire lore, they drove a stake through the man's heart to kill him. The group then took the man's body to Santa Paula, placing it under a large stone grave. Locals rejoiced when the vampire attack ceased, thus proving that they had killed the right man. Time goes on, and the tree started to grow over the slab covering the vampire's grave. And it said if you break one of its branches, it will spurt blood, and even the leaves of the tree will leave a strange red residue in your hands if you handle them. Now, the tree is now really large and has a huge root system that grabs the slab like tentacles of an octopus. It said that when the tree's roots system eventually breaks the slab, or causes a gap between the slab and the rest of the tomb, the vampire will escape and seek revenge on modern citizens of the cosmopolitan Guadalajara.
Oh my!
That's weird. You know what? This is. It's funny how we read about mob mentality. Oh, well, it's a vampire. Oh, let's find the palest, the skinniest looking guy. He must be a vampire, and then kill him.
Yes, and I think it was that count, that guy who was kind of quiet and kept to himself and kind of looked pale and elegant. They thought, oh, it must be him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what a terrifying time to live in. One little person who's just jittery and superstitious. Next thing you know, the whole town's stringing you up and driving a stake through your heart because they think you're a vampire.
I know, mob mentality. It's terrible.
This goes with the witches in the forest that deal with herbs.
Right. If you're different, people are going to notice it and
prey on it. Who's the real monsters here? That's what I want to know. What's interesting, though, is it said they found animals that were drained of blood, and then they found babies. Now, I'm thinking again that there's the chupacabra, which is apparently something that will drain the blood from small animals and things. So I'm wondering if there's a chupacabra relation here, that's what's been attacking animals and small children left unattended.
I'm sure. I'm sure a modern search would turn out a different theory than what they found and what they thought back then. Yeah.
But it makes me wonder if a chupacabra isn't in relation or something. Maybe not even a chupacabra, just something that would drain the blood of a small animal and an infant. I mean, an infant's still pretty big, even though it's small. That's a lot of blood.
That's a lot of blood, yeah.
It just makes you wonder what fuels the vampire stuff. I mean, is it because they read a folklore from Europe? I mean, it's just interesting where that stuff would come from.
And if they weren't even found near the man's premises, why him? Why would they single him out?
Yeah, that's the part I don't understand. It's like, yikes. I don't know. Interesting.
It's interesting what you said about mob mentality, because my mother, when she was growing up, she told me that anybody who was a little off or a little bit different was noticed by the whole neighborhood and sometimes made fun of. So I'm not surprised that was the mentality of a lot of people from that time.
Just signaling people, pulling them out and say, oh, they're different. It must be them. And they must have done this and this. Oh, yeah, they must have done that. Let's get them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it wasn't as bad in my mother's time, but I'm sure if they thought that the local different person was a weirdo, I can imagine way back how awful it must have been if you were somebody who was different than the rest of your peers.
Well, I think of when we did that episode about Half-Hanged Mary was the same deal, where she was just different, so people just couldn't handle it.
Yeah, exactly.
So the mob's like, oh, nothing witch, she's doing everything, she's cursing everyone, let's do her in. It's like, no, actually she's is an herbalist and she's helping people, but they get it in their head and that's it. Pitchforks and torches.
Exactly. Sadly, people who are different throughout life has not had an easy time of it. So, but anyway, I'd love to visit this cemetery someday. I'd love to, my relatives have been asking me to come visit them in Guadalajara, so I'm going to tell them to bring me to this place.
Yeah, if I was ever there, I would definitely go on the tour of the cemetery.
Yeah.
Of course, I probably wouldn't. I'm sure the tour is not in English. Or maybe it is. You never know.
Well, I'm sure it's not, but you never know because they're tourists. So
yeah, they get a lot of. I'm sure they get a lot of American tourists to Guadalajara. So maybe
they do. A lot of Americans live there too. So
this will be an interesting location.
Yeah,
I would love to investigate at night. You know what I mean? And just a nighttime investigation.
If they'll let you in at night, sure, we get permission.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, wouldn't it? Just to stake yourself out for the night.
It would be. Can you imagine what we would spot there? But hopefully nothing. But you never know.
No idea.
Especially if you and I are involved
over there. Yeah, Nachito's playing with his toys down there. There's a kid swinging from the tree up there. Yeah, I don't know.
We watch us spot them all. Yeah. So, I mean, if anybody lives in Guadalajara, Mexico, and they're listening to the show, if there's more stories about this place or any other place, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of social history about how people react to incidents when they happen, based on their religion, based on their experiences, based on their knowledge. And it's just funny how man has sort of evolved.
Sort of.
This is every aspect of my life and how I approach it. We can kind of separate it a little better than we used to. But I think this is a good example of stories where it would just control them. Their religion would just control them. No matter what.
Yeah. Right.
But good story. Interesting.
So, great story. So
all right, folks.
That's all for this story, folks.
Yep. That's this week. And until next week, we'll say goodbye. All right. Bye.
See you all next week. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.